Welcome to this episode of the Sridhar Podcast, part of the series for engineering students and recent grads. Every couple of weeks, I'll be talking to tech executives, startup founders, and entrepreneurs to answer questions that students in engineering school have sent me and I have curated. My guest today is Baris Erkmen. Baris is an internationally renowned expert in the deep tech and very exciting field of wireless optical communications. Very recently, he was elected as the 2022 Fellow of the Optical Society for his contributions to the advancement of these systems in performance, tech maturity, large-scale manufacturing, and cost. Baris has worked on terrestrial, airborne, and spaceborne wireless optical communication systems during his stint at NASA JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratories, previously, and at Project Tara in GoogleX, where he is the CTO at present, but I understand that might be changing soon. He has a bachelor's, master's, and PhD, all in electrical engineering from MIT. Welcome, Baris.
Thank you, Sridhar. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Great to have you here, Baris. So Baris, what was your thought process when you decided to study all the way up to your PhD, in one go, right after high school?
It's an excellent question. And to be quite honest with you, I can't say that it was necessarily a well thought out decision. My parents, my mom and my dad are both in the academia. They're both professors of electrical engineering, actually. And I always joke that kids either grow up to be wanting to be just like their parents or wanting to be exactly the opposite of their parents. I was in the first camp, as you have guessed, perhaps. So it was always obvious to me that I would go do my undergrad and then my master's and my PhD. And I even thought maybe after that I'd become a faculty. Obviously, that part of the story changed, but it was almost that I did it out of habit, out of anything else. Of course, looking back, I realize I've learned some really critical and important skills in the process of that. But if you ask me why, it's more out of habit than anything else.
That's true. That's true for perhaps 90% of us anyways. I can totally relate to what you're saying. So I still think that you were pretty clear-headed in terms of what you wanted to do, right? Now, today, if there was a student who's an undergrad in engineering and is trying to decide between the options of working after undergrad, which is what I did, studying further like what you did, or maybe even starting a business, right? How would you advise them to go about making that decision? Is there a framework you'd suggest they use?
I can talk a little bit about the framework that I try to use now whenever I'm facing some critical decisions. And I have to credit my wife, Alexandra, for helping develop this. In fact, I would say she developed it and I've adopted it over the years and it works okay for us. I don't know if it'll work for everyone else, but I'll just describe it anyway. But let me start by saying out of those three options, they are all perfectly respectable, perfectly meaningful paths for anyone to take. And so ultimately what matters is that the individual making the decision feels some fulfillment out of that activity. In order to be able to feel fulfillment, I think the most important thing is for you or someone to be honest with themselves about why they want to go down each of those paths. And I've found personally that honesty is an iterative process when it comes to being honest with myself. Oftentimes I think I'm being honest with myself and I realize after a few of the iterations of what I'm about to describe that I wasn't being completely honest with myself. So what I'm going to describe is not rocket science. It's a very simple thing, which is to start at any moment in time when you're faced with a big decision. Write down all the things that are important to you, whatever they may be. So for example, for working versus continuing in school, it might be making money, getting experience in the real world, going deep in some technical subject. Write all of those things down. Assign a weight to them, however you feel at the moment, how important that category is to you, to your fulfillment. And then for all the options ahead of you, two, hopefully not more than three, score them, give a rank. And don't go from 1 to 10, that's too many, but maybe from 1 to 3 or maybe 1 to 5 at most. And then look at the weighted sum of those things. And most important, after you see the weighted sum of each options, pause and think about the answer for a few minutes about whether you like the one that scored the highest or not. You'll tell yourself that you do like it or it just doesn't sit right with you. If it doesn't sit right with you, I guarantee you haven't been honest with yourself about something, either in the way that you've ranked your importance or the score you've given for a category. And that process for me, just going through that 2 or 3 times, eventually these decisions are hard. They're not always obvious, but eventually I feel like I've made the decision that I am most comfortable with. And it gives me fulfillment on what's about to come next. I don't have regrets about the path at that point. I at least feel like I've gone through the process with myself to decide that that was the right thing for me to do. I still do this for big decisions whenever they come up and whenever the path is not obvious. So if you don't know what a framework, you don't have a better framework, I'd say give it a try, see if it works for you.
Awesome. I think the takeaway, and there were some very good takeaways in there, which is I think you explained the mechanics of how you chart out those different decisions and assign weights to them. But I think the most important thing is that you have to be honest to yourself about the result that comes out at the end, and make sure that you're bought in on the decision before you make the decision. Great points, Bariss. Yeah. Thank you. So you grew up in Turkey up until the time you were in high school, and I understand you are multilingual at home. How did you improve your skills in speaking, professional writing, and communications, given that you studied in the US after that?
Yeah, so my story is a little bit backward, but I resonate with your question very much. So let me take a second to explain that. I was born in the US, and so when I was very young, I grew up hearing English or reading English, even though my parents spoke in Turkish to me. And then we went back to Turkey, and my written and communication skills in Turkish was terrible. I mean, I understood Turkish, but I could not speak it properly. And, my writing composition skills were really poor. Mm-hmm. And I was going to school in Turkey, and obviously the education language of choice there was Turkish, with sciences being in English. And I will admit it was a struggle. I think just relentless practicing is one thing that I can say. One thing I found to be useful, and again, I don't know if this will work for anybody else, but watch TV. The skill of using language and everyday language in a way that, you learn idioms, you learn phrases, you learn intonation. Somehow watching TV helped me get that. And I will say, when I came back to the US for college, I had become rusty in my English, more or less. And I didn't have a very strong accent, but my vocabulary was extremely poor. And again, watching TV allowed me to build that up slowly. I'm not saying it's perfect today, but at least that is one little trick that I can share with the audience here. And I hope it works for them as well.
It definitely does. I think a lot of us who are non-native speakers of English, like I am, I think we all grew up watching TV. We didn't realize that in addition to getting entertained, we were also learning a new language. So I can definitely agree with what you're saying. Awesome, Bariss. So let's say I'm a student and I'm doing a bunch of things while I'm at university, right? I work on projects, I work on my courses, I participate in competitions, I'm active in sport and maybe learning a few performing arts, because all of these are fun to do, right? How should I go about finding my specialization, right? All of these seem interesting to me, and university is where you pick up a lot of these skills. But the skills that are really valuable, the ones that I should get much better at, how do I figure out what those are?
Good question. I don't exactly know that I have a silver bullet answer here. I think the skills that are always the most beneficial, no matter what you're doing, I've found, is those that are related to problem solving. What I mean by that is, there are many instances in life where the problem, whether it's technical instances or personal, where the problem statement is ambiguous. And the first thing you need to do is clarify what the problem means, and then put some constraints on it, make some assumptions, and try to get to a answer and a solution, a path forward. Whether this is a technical problem you're trying to solve, or you're moving to a new city and you need to figure out how to set up a life there. Effectively, these are the same skills that you're using, but very different applications of the same skills. So, I mean, there's certainly a personal enrichment and fulfillment on some of the activities you mentioned, and I'm not saying don't do those things for that purpose. That's a perfectly legitimate reason to do them. But the skills that will carry with you throughout your life, I've found are the ones that are related to this. Like, how do you take a very complex, ambiguous situation and break it down into actionable pieces where you can move forward? It helps with your technical life. It helps with your personal life. It helps with all kinds of things that life throws at you. So I think I'm just going to stick with that answer for now. There are other activities, of course, that just give you personal enrichment, and those are, of course, very, very important as well. But the ones that help you build these skills are, I think, the ones that you can use throughout your life.
Good points. I think what I'm hearing you say is definitely focus on the personal enrichment, study the topics that are most appealing to you and you probably are good at, naturally, right? But also in general, get better at problem solving, regardless of what area you're solving the problem in. Great points, Baris. This is an interesting question that I heard from a bunch of students that I spoke to. I like what I'm doing right now, but I realize in a few years from now that it's not as much fun as it was, initially when I started doing it. Do I persevere and continue to push on, or do I drop it and pick something else up, to do, right? How should I approach this decision if I have to make one?
Yeah, this is a tough one too, because the specifics of the circumstance matter more than the generalities, perhaps. Let me try to answer that in a meaningful way. So first of all, if you're one of those people that every year and a half say, I don't know if this is interesting, let me switch to something else, then there's probably something deeper that requires you to think harder about, like, why are you switching every few years? So it is possible to give up too early, right? I mean, every problem when you first start is hard. The first time you get on a bicycle, you don't just start pedaling. You have to fall down a few times. And if you decide that's not fun enough and you walk away, well, maybe you'll never learn how to bike. On the other hand, if you're doing something and after a while it isn't interesting to you or fulfilling to you and it turns into a chore and you dread every time you have to face it, that's definitely time to move on and think about the next adventure for yourself. So there's a balance. There isn't a unique answer that I can give for every circumstance. I would say that if you feel like something is not as exciting or as fun as you thought it was going to be, it depends on how long you've been at it, how hard you've tried at it, how important it is to your future. My instinct would be make a plan for sticking with it for some amount of time. I don't know if that's months or years. That depends on the circumstance. Give it your best shot. And at the end of that, reevaluate. If you're still unhappy, then maybe that's a good reason to pivot at that point in time. If you started to see some buds of excitement or interest and, maybe that needs to be nurtured a little bit more, then at that time, pick another period of time, stick with it some more time, see if those buds grow into new sprung life. Sometimes it grows on you and you become an expert in something you thought you hated at the beginning. And sometimes it becomes very obvious that's just not the right thing for you, and you should move on in that case and not be afraid to do so.
Right. I'm hearing you say be stoic enough on one topic to to try it for a reasonable amount of time before you do give up, and that makes sense. And that's a great segue to my next question. You mentioned plans. You mentioned sort of time periods, right?
Yeah.
Is it a good plan? Is it a good idea to have a 3 or a 5 year plan for my career? Because if I'm a current student, I can't even connect the dots between where I am now and where I need to be 5 years from now or 3 years from now, right?
Yeah.
Should I even go about coming up with a 5 year plan? What do you think about that? Are those any good?
I was just thinking about your remark that I think I'm coming across as being this super organized, well-planned person, and I'm the exact opposite. So let me just take a moment to correct maybe that impression by answering this question. I don't think I've ever, at any point in my life, had a 5 year plan, because circumstances just change so quickly. It's very hard to know where you will be in 5 years. I've certainly dreamed about where I want to be in 5 years. I don't think I've ever actually been there, looking back from 5 years. And maybe what I'm about to say is a little bit too strong, but I'll still say it. A lot of those nice sort of romantic, inspirational stories about career trajectories are all told in hindsight. I don't think anybody at the beginning of their life says, I am going to follow this path to, whatever greatness you want to define for yourself. There might be some exceptions, but most of us are not as foresightful as that. A lot of times, having reached the end point, we look back and we weave a story that beautifully connects all the disparate dots that at the time we could not figure out how they connected to each other. So my suggestion is, for a 5 year I don't think a plan is the right thing. Have an idea of what you want the next chapter of your life to be. That chapter might be only a year, it might be 2 years, maybe it is 5 years if you're committing to go to school, for example. It could be a 4 to 5 year journey. But figure out what that next chapter for your life is. What is the fulfillment you want out of that? And then dive into that, whatever the time duration is. So I think maybe it's a cop-out answer, but I'm going to say that instead of thinking of it as timelines where you have to connect the dots, think of them as chapters where you don't know where the story is leading, and you don't have to. You just need to know that the next chapter is about whatever it is the next thing you're about to embark on. That's at least what I've done in my career. And looking back, I am able to weave a story that sounds pretty good now. So I will recommend that to everybody else.
That makes sense. That makes total sense, Bariss. I think that's a good way of looking at it for sure. All right, let me just go through my list of questions over here. All right.
Sure.
So you have pretty much focused on technical engineering education for most of your time in university, right?
Yeah.
Are there, and I'm sure you apply a lot of that in your everyday life, but are there specific courses or subjects, either in engineering or even outside of that you think are super important for all students, young adults, to learn really well because they are super applicable in their working lives?
That's an excellent question. I'm going to give an answer that's very heavily engineering biased. And I think, I hope throughout the many guests on your program, you'll have a more balanced answer than what I'm about to give now. And I'm going to take your question literally and say, I found that some of the most foundational classes or knowledge that I've had that I apply everywhere in my life is statistics and probability. That's probably one of the big ones. Signals and systems, like understanding frequency and time and how they relate to each other, helps in all kinds of things, like, even in interpreting everyday life events. So those are, I would say, two of the foundational ones that I've found myself using everywhere. And I'm sure there's more. There's some, foundational physics and math class, of course, that you need to understand basic things like action and reaction. But I'll stop there. I don't know if that was exactly what you were looking for, but those I find very useful.
No, this question has so many answers depending on who you speak to and what is their line of study. So there is no one answer. I definitely wanted to hear your answer for this, and I think you did exactly that. That's great, Bariss. Thank you.
Great.
Moving on from college and university and undergrad, let's just focus on young professionals who are just entering the workforce or have been in the workforce for a few years right now. What are your thoughts, or what did you think about money at this point in your career, right? Did you save or invest your earnings? Again, I want to add a note to the audience. This is not financial advice. Please do your own research, but I would love to hear, were you serious about money? What would you do with your savings? Or did you save to begin with?
Yeah, it's a good question. I did save. In fact, I would say the first money I earned, which was an undergrad, I was extremely proud to have been able to save it. I was like, wow, I have money to save now, put aside. And it felt like an adult thing that I'd finally gotten to. So it was a rite of passage in some sense. I definitely personally, I'm a believer in making sure that you are putting away money early and, investing early, as it's a good habit builder. Plus, it grows reasonably well over time, and it's nice to have that experience. I would say don't deny yourselves, if you can afford to, the pleasures that come with being able to spend money. I wouldn't say spend everything you make and miss out on the experiences that you can have as a young professional. But definitely putting some money away and thinking about that is helpful. I never invested money in the modern sense where I would risk the money on something that I thought could have strong returns. At that time, that was just too risky for me as a profile. But if you have money to spare, you can definitely carve out some of it and do that too. That's very respectable. It just wasn't my experience.
Got it. Awesome. I think I'm hearing you say, just like everything else in life, moderation is key. Don't spend too much, but also don't deny yourself a lot. That's great advice. I think we're coming to the final set of questions. Yeah. So Bariss, you have been, studying and working in perhaps some of the most intense environments, right? MIT and then JPL and then right now at GoogleX, right? How do you balance your work and your health in this digital age, especially after COVID with work from home? It's getting more and more difficult for us to do this balancing act. How do you tackle this? Are there some personal, health hacks that work really well for you that you'd like to share?
First of all, I should admit that if anyone else has advice, I am one to be receiving it. Definitely do not claim to have done a good job, especially in the pandemic, maintaining health. That being said, I will share something that my doctor shared with me, which I actually liked. I haven't been able to practice it to the degree that I am satisfied with, but I thought it was a good suggestion. His suggestion was, it's nice to be able to mentally break from work and home. And we used to be able to do that because we would have a commute of some sort or the other. For me, that was a bike commute, which was very fulfilling.
Right.
And his suggestion was reintroduce that commute. I mean, your destination is still your home, but walk out the door in the morning and get on your bike and ride for 15 minutes and then come to work, which is your home, and do your thing. And at the end of the day, get back on your bike and do a 15-minute ride before you come back and say, okay, I'm home now and I'm not working. I managed to do this sparingly, but whenever I do it, it definitely creates the mental break that I need. I wish I could do it more, and I will admit that I'm trying to do better, but I thought it was good advice, and having tried it a few times, I actually like the outcome too. So I will pass that on to whoever wants to listen to it. Excellent.
That's a great idea. All right, let's have the final set of rapid fire questions for fun, and think of some answers in 5 to 10 seconds for each of these, right? Can you name one? Can you name one book or TV show or anything of that sort that completely changed the way you think about something? Think about things in general.
Well, I'm going to give a half answer. I'm really enjoying The Expanse. That's a show I'm watching, and I really like it. But I would say the one that I find quite fascinating is looking back and watching the old Star Trek series, because there are so many toys at the time that have become reality in our timeline, like those tablets and phones and stuff, that I find that really amusing. I don't know that it's completely changed my way of thinking, but I've definitely developed a respect for the amount of imagination the writers had at the time.
True, very true. I think it was Arthur C. Clarke, the famous science fiction writer, who said that. I don't remember exactly what he said, but he essentially said science fiction is what sort of predicts what comes in the future, right? In terms of magic, they show you stuff that's magical, but it becomes reality at some point in the future. Makes sense. What was your best career move, and if you can share this as well, your biggest career mistake?
Tricky. I'm not going to name names because I don't want to get into trouble. I've definitely enjoyed the private industry aspect of my career, or portion of my career. Not to say that I didn't enjoy the other parts. I think both my highs and my lows have happened sort of in that realm. And I'm going to leave it at that, if you don't mind, just so I don't get myself into trouble.
Of course. All right. And this the final question I have for you, Bariss, is if you could go back in time and tell your 20-year-old self just one sentence, right? What would you say?
I would say you're in for a ride that you cannot imagine right now, but just go with it because it will turn out okay. In one sentence, that's all I would say. But I could not have imagined my path when I was back, in college, thinking about the future.
So I'm hearing you say it'll all eventually work out. Is essentially what I'm trying to say. Awesome.
Yes.
Great, Bariss. As always, it's a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for your time today, and great to have you on the show.
Yeah, thank you, Sridhar, again. This was fun. I wish you the best. Talk to you soon.
Thanks. Bye.